Well, this is a bit of a first for us because we think we're bringing you a totally new way of configuring AV over IP. And we have with us today 5 industry leaders who are involved with exactly that. So if I may introduce you all, starting with Stefan Ledergerber, CEO of Simplexity. Hello, Stefan. Gerard Phillips,
Hi.
Systems engineer, much misunderstood and underrated profession, don't mind me doing. ARISTA Networks. To his right is Wolfgang Salzbrenner, who's the CEO of STAGETEC. Hello, Wolfgang. To his right is Maurice Engler, product manager, emerging technologies. And nearest to me, unfortunately, the poor soul, being in therapy at the end of the week, is Donald Sievewright from Matrox. Interesting concept, actually. It's not very often you have 5 such eminent companies coming together to say they're working on a new standard. And certainly for me, it seems to be the live events industry, although do correct me if I'm wrong, that they hope that is going to get traction and move on and be taken up by people and being developed, which I think is a sound, solid idea. But how did it start? Who came up with the idea? Are you going to tell me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it seemed a logical thing to do because, you know, we have a lot of things on standards at the moment, Stefan, and the big thing in the AV market, regardless of live events or corporate or whatever it is the AV industry doesn't get interoperability or hasn't done. They're hardware-based. Yes, they conform to what they call as a standard, which isn't really compared to the IT world, but it tends to be a small collection of companies whose kit work well within their own closed environments, but isn't wide enough to be, really put into the much bigger environment that AV needs to operate in now. Certainly since COVID, which has really opened up the importance of integration, interoperability, and flexible environments that have to adapt with all kinds of different kit. And even the box suppliers, including you, if I may say so, who've been making an awful lot of money and fantastically brilliant devices, and now thinking, what value are we all going to have if we do have to become much more open and interoperable? So it sort of intrigued me how the whole idea of this came about. I mean, who started it and how did it get traction?
I guess there was some initiative from my side when I met Wolfgang. I'm very active on all those standardization groups, and I see the whole conversation going on there. I see what the problems there are solved, and all that's really, really all cool.
Because you're a consultancy, aren't you?
Yes, right.
Okay, so you're quite cross. Is it so mainly what markets are you involved with?
We are heavily involved in broadcast. But we see these markets kind of getting mixed together. I call it media production,
yes,
whatever that is. So we've been involved in many full IP projects already now in the broadcast industry, and we see exactly where they are short. And one of them is actually that it's a huge complexity we have to master in the IP side. And so the standards, as you say, there are technical standards. Basically, they care about how to exchange bits and bytes between the different manufacturers, and that's great, cool, no worries. But all these technical people, they tend to say, you know what, if it comes to operating it, like having a user interface or a user experience for it, sometime will do a really cool user interface for our great piece of art we are doing here. But we are actually looking at the real installations, they end up being very compromised on the user experience. So they work, kind of, and once they work, everyone leaves them untouched. But the user experience is kind of, not as you would expect on a 2022 network.
So a lot of time, these interfaces are bespoke according to the application they're involved with, and it tends to be a one-off or individual type of development for that particular application or live event or whatever it may be.
Exactly.
Because networking engineers and live, they're pretty well admired, amazing people, aren't they? I mean, the corporate world is very different to that. I mean, it really needs a lot of hand-holding. But it's surprising that the live event industry, which in a sense doesn't need it in a sense, will be then expanding to include this and develop it as a standard. that's what surprised me in a sense, because it's not where I would expect it to come from.
Right. I mean, basically, you're absolutely right. It's a one-off stuff very often. But on the other side, looking at IP, what's networking about? It's a lot about dynamics. You know, when I walk into someone's home, I need a Wi-Fi password, and to use this example from you, I log into Wi-Fi and I start surfing the web, I start printing, it works. And I couldn't care less how, it just does. And the AV industry, broadcast industry as well, this whole audio, video, IP stuff is so far from this experience. So we basically, when we met, we said, you know, this could be a goal, and how could it work? We could actually set a goal and set, well, you call it standard, but it's not a technical standard. It's like we want to show how we can feel to operate such a network from a user point of view, and everything else has to follow. So we don't want to get started on the technical bits, we want to start from the user experience and work backwards from there.
Yeah, you're renowned within your own markets for being much closer to the personal, you know, sensible side of really what works personally, right? So, or corporate world, it's a bit more remote, it's much more stiffer. You know, it's not quite as flexible, having to solve problems on the moment quite in the same way broadcast and the live events industry does, for example. It's a very much bigger live, immediate problem-solving environment, so you would expect that to be much more dynamic in a sense. So, Stagenet, how did it develop? When did you come into it, Wolfgang? And was it a conversation between both of you and it just sort of broadened out and expanded?
Yeah, it started with the idea. Perhaps you know StageTec. StageTec stands or is very famous for digital audio networks, for high audio quality systems, especially also for the stability of our systems of the Nexus. And the idea was behind, or was when we met the first time, to transform the analog world on the Nexus side to the IP world. And this was the idea behind, to get or to create a system which is similar, or which is exactly so stable as Nexus before was, with the same audio quality, and for the future also with the possibility not only to transport audio, for what also StageTec stands, audio in the past, but in the future also to transport video parallel, with a GUI which makes it able to handle by everybody without without to have an engineer beside you.
I can see the logical concept of that very much so. Gerard, how do you come? How do you all get together? Gerard, you can start.
Yeah, sure. I mean, ARISTA is well known in the kind of media entertainment world. 2110, we've built awful lot of live production, high value chain systems. One of the things that comes across from our data center experience and marketplace is automation, and that's for me, that's where ARISTA got invited in the sense that we share the same values of quality, simplicity, making it easy, and the thing that enables this project to become simple is that you can automate away the complexity of the network if you leave a software layer to do that for you. And so part of the project is the simplicity of the GUI, and then the other part is that it takes away the complexity of the network. It gives you the flexibility, but it takes away the complexity of having to understand it and configure it. It abstracts that away and allows the network to become a transparent provider of flexibility and functionality.
It's huge. There's such a huge demand for that in the corporate world, I can't tell you. Maurice, did you all know each other regardless? You all were doing business with each other, or were you new to each other?
I mean, some of them we knew each other, and some others are new, but definitely we have been, for example, I didn't know personally before, but we were having installations with ARISTA switches, obviously, and so on. So the thing is that merging technologies is now since 2010 or 11, I think 11, with the first product in the audio over IP world. So we were amongst the first ones having something available in an open platform, basically on A67 and Ravenna. And we have encountered, of course, many projects. We propose our own ecosystem, obviously, but we are very conscious that it has to be an open ecosystem to be able to integrate in other ecosystems, and that's the deal. And we always have had this approach. But as one company, even independently of the size of the company, you can't do things on your own anymore. And you have to partner in a clever way, because I think the bottom line is also the business model. You have other types of communities that are driven by a business model where it's licensed in terms of a product that is very closed and it doesn't open to others, which is not the case here. So it's a growing community that is not linked to a product or what the product has inside, but if the manufacturer is ready to do the effort to be able to be part of the community. So it's a complete different angle to look at it and much more open. And the pressure comes from the customers also, because we have been part of many installations where typically there has been a bunch of engineers behind designing the backbone, which works, but then that's it. And 2 years later, but we would like to evolve this, whatever it is, audio's part or video part or whatever it is, but you have to get the engineers again in and to work on it, where StageNet on that aspect is dynamic and can grow, even though if you just do step one, but then you can evolve with it. And this, we liked it very much on that aspect, the flexibility and the dynamic about it.
Donald, I can guess where you come in, but I'll let you talk anyway.
Well, we came into this general environment, the ST2110 IPMX environment, about 4 years ago, when it became a big thing in broadcast. And really, we worked in broadcast for a long time with an emerging standard, and we were involved with a lot of the early installations. But of course, all of the early installations in broadcast already had a control system, maybe perfect or imperfect, but it was a control system that was used by that particular installation to control everything, including all of the devices, and that included the control mechanism for those devices. For this market, there is not a tradition of having those large control systems that will control an entire environment. And because of the nature of this market, the more audio-visual market, you have a world where the installations will change somewhat regularly, and you don't necessarily want to have a large number of engineers to make those changes. So the advantage of what Simplicity and StageTec are doing with StageNet is they're creating an overarching environment which allows people to change the environment and how the environment works without having experts on the ground all the time. And for a manufacturer, the advantage for that, for us in this environment, is because it's a complete standard. We don't have to spend much time trying to make bits of kit work to another piece of kit. They should just plug together. And in fact, how we met each other was through interops in original ST2110 environments. So we were meeting at an engineering level, and the discussion at the engineering level led to a more commercial discussion within the organisations. And it's an ideal environment for us because we're principally a hardware vendor. We really don't want to be involved at the software level.
No, that's the interesting point, is how these things develop, who has the idea, how the platform starts at its basic level, how you build it up, how you test it, which other technology you bring in to check it, how flexible and how robust it is, and how that works in a practical working group, which I find probably quite interesting, probably a separate story here, but worth telling nevertheless, and the aviators are fascinated by that, because no one really understands how standards come about and how they're developed. They're very cynical about them, because everybody here has proprietary systems and needs a good excuse for them not to be. I think we all love to work in a proprietary world because you know it works. But actually now we're being forced kicking and screaming into a world that's much more interoperable, where people don't have and can't guard their specialist expertise and investment they used to have that grew that business in the first place, and see their USPs suddenly disappearing down a road over which they have no control. So in a sense, it's quite a brave thing to develop and put together. So I can see a very close, tightly knit group who know each other and can develop and know each other's expertise to develop this environment slowly, surely, and everything else and make sure it works. The difficult bit, however, is getting wider exposure, APIs specifically from lots of different manufacturers like say, Harman or goodness knows who else, you know. I mean, down to you have, what, 350, I suppose, people signing up? Nice to see it's software. How's that stage going to be managed and everything else? I mean, slowly but surely so far, it's working within your own markets. Presumably you're using this as a proof of concept for what you're already doing now. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean,
Putting you on the spot here, aren't I, Stefan? But you know, I think these questions need to be asked, don't they?
I spent the longest time of my career as a head of R&D and as an R&D engineer.
I thought there must be something in this.
Somewhere, right?
Yeah.
My experience is where there's a will, there's a way, and if there's a clear goal, you can reach it. And I think a lot of these endless discussions are based on hypothetical, philosophical stuff. And here it was pretty clear, starting at the user interface, this is what we need to reach. And now, Matrox, can you deliver this? Is it possible to actually get, I don't know, buffer states and whatever out of your box? Merging, can we get this out of your box? And so on. So we basically had very specific, clear goals, and then people saw why it's necessary if they don't have it yet, and they were willing to actually implement it if it wasn't there. So I think it's really just down to be very specific in the use case, in the requirements, and then actually the R&D engineers are going to solve it.
So when you say it, what is it? It's called it's an environment, an initiative. Can we call it an initiative called StageNet?
Sure.
But then what are the elements of StageNet?
The elements is actually, we want to make IP simple. That's kind of the conviction.
I get that.
The
What are the specifics of it?
The specifics is basically we want to build a system which meets two conditions. The first condition is there's little or no expertise available when operating this system. And the second one is it's dynamic, it's changing, it's easy to just change things the way I'm actually expecting this from a network. So to fulfill these two things, it's actually, you can derive everything else from it. So in order to do that, we said, okay, here's an open standard, let's use it. It doesn't contain this and this, we can't monitor RTP errors with that standard. Let's just talk to the R&D guys and say, how can we get these RTP errors across? And find some protocol and do it. And so we kind of did not get trapped into these technical discussions. It was just kind of, I don't care how you R&D guys do it, but we need to get those RTP errors across.
I'm just trying to work out what you're doing differently that we're not doing it currently at the moment. And I'm searching for something tangible I can put my finger on to say, well, these are the established protocols people are using and how they're communicating.
Okay.
In some instances of application demands,
right,
they are not working. There are particularly local requirements that people have difficulty with that in the live event or other world broadcast, piece of cake, you get round, think round them, you're technically qualified and experienced to be able to do these fixes and do them solidly and properly. In the business world, they're not. And they have to rely on much bigger, established ways of doing stuff and everything else. You're a serious set of problem solvers that are used to doing that. It's a question of putting your finger on what we have here that we're developing. I do get the overall definition of it, but it's not a technical definition of what physically you've got. Okay. So we can sort of entice the outside world and say that this is what's happening here. It's a work in progress, but this is something you should really watch and invest in and watch this development. It's got traction, it's got legs, this is going to be coming down the road, you need to be involved and plan for it now.
Okay, so I hope I get this right. Basically, what we have here now is a plug and play system where you can have specific products and not modules or technologies, products, which you can plug into an ARISTA switch, and then they pop up on a user interface and you can start using them, including the switch itself. So there's no setup guideline or whatever, what have you. That's actually what we have right now today. So there's a few specific products which we have integrated. You could almost call it as a proof of concept for now, because we want to show people that's how you operate it, and the user experience is there, and we can show today what it means to the user to plug in a device until he can actually make his first connection, which takes let's say minutes. So, and he doesn't have to know about multicast, he doesn't have to know about IP addresses, he basically doesn't have to know all that. So that's what we have. Now, on a technical level, if you were asking for that, on a technical level, we found NMOS ISO 4 to be very practical to do the discovery amongst each other. It does everything we need. It leads us to our goal very quick, so everyone uses NMOS ISO 4, and that's what we do as a discovery. Right. Now, we wanted to use further NMOS to start setting up the device, and we found, stop it, no way to set up a stream format, for instance, for an audio device. So we said, okay, now we do it ourselves. So then we actually had to do proprietary API calls to these products to actually start setting up the stream format, because we need to. And then we get to the next one and said, okay, we want to monitor the stuff. We want to oversee what's going on, coming back to packet losses and stuff like this. Then we found, okay, is there any protocol we can use for that? The answer is actually no. But some of it basically, or we already have the hooks into these products, and we might as well just expand the API calls in order to get it. It's very pragmatic on that side. So whatever's there, which brings us to the goal quickest, we use. And we welcome the standards warmly, because it makes our jobs easier. But if they don't deliver, we do it. We kind of have to expand them in the way to get to the user experience.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? And,
Exactly.
and then by more APIs, you have the more ways of testing the different protocols people use within their products. The more robust it's going to be. I mean, the manifestation of that is in this amazing user interface, which is simple, clear, and automatic switch configuration. I think it's great. I think that's the most valuable thing you've got here, and that's a huge demand, a corporate or something like that. The question of how you define your users. I mean, that on its own is great. You seem to have two parts of the user interface, which is very intriguing. How do you describe what each is and what it does?
Sure. There's 2 pages on the user interface.
Yeah.
One
link into the videos and everything else after our people
Okay.
to look in and get more in-depth information. So that's
Cool.
really good. Visually,
Good.
I thought it the visual representation of it was quite compelling. I thought actually,
Yes.
really clearly done.
Good. So basically, there's two pages there. One is a connection page, and the other one is kind of a physical view on the reality, which I would call not interesting for most people. But you can. So we start at a non-technical level, but actually, as a matter of fact, if you are technical, you get all the detailed information, the technical information out of that user interface. It's just like you need to dig a little bit deeper. So basically, we expect the user, the target user, to work on we call it a content level. So basically, he has a source which is called keyboard, and he wants to connect that keyboard to a loudspeaker or something else, or to a mixer. So he sees a keyboard and he basically drags and drops it across and connects it to the mixer. And at this moment, and actually that's where it's working, he couldn't care less where this keyboard is connected and where it's coming from, in which room, whatever. For him, it's a keyboard. So we use a paradigm which we all use from web browsers. If you type in a link in your web browser, you get a content, the website, and you could care less where this server is standing. Is it next door? Is it another continent? You couldn't care less. This is the vision. I'm not saying this is the vision where this page comes from. You have a content, you want that content to be connected. And so that's one side of it. a very non-technical page. But actually, at the same page, we indicate the status if there's something wrong with that content. If there's some technical issues, that's exactly where you're going to get the warning. So it's actually not just a control panel, it's also a monitoring panel at the same time, which gets set up automatically based on what you've just done. So there's no configuration of, please oversee that IP address, is it still there or not? Because that's automatically done in the background. It's happening, but it's not visible. And so then the second page, which kind of shows you the network, and it's probably more for the technical people, they see links and they see how everything is connected. They see the stage of links, what kind of bandwidth is currently in use, how many multicast flows there are the devices getting soon overloaded, that kind of stuff. It's all there. It's cool, but it's kind of also even that information is shown in a quite intuitive way. And so this is actually there to give you security and the confidence that the system is actually working. And that's actually a thing which at this moment where a lot of people are still kind of new to IP, they have they're shying away from it because they're not quite sure, I don't hear audio, so what's wrong? That kind of stuff. We want, by working with our system, we want them to experience that if the system says everything's okay, it is okay. And if they hear audio or video getting distorted or whatever, they see a warning and it's going to tell you what's the problem.
So who's going to be the technical user of, presumably a technical user of this? What? I mean, the downside of anything network-based was it was behind the scenes and it was usually the responsibility of someone who came up for air at 10 minutes or whatever it is now. But on the audiovisual side, we have a major series of specific roles are very technical now coming out of all this. And it's brought it above the service, if you like, made it much more accessible and more normal. Oh, this is something you can do yourself, control yourself. You don't need some black box chap from the IT department controlling it. This is in your hands, and you have your AV engineers or whoever you're using to manage this. That to me is a huge sell for this.
Exactly.
And a greatly convincing tool that I have seen. There's been a huge demand for an overall sensible interface that controls the complexity of AV on a network for a long time. Not just originally out of audio, of course, this is why everybody fell in love with Dante, thinking it was going to solve everybody's problems, even though it went from hardware to software ultimately. So I think, but no one really felt that, the audio world was very much bogged down in their own particular protocol standards, that it was very much an intellectual debate. This actually almost seems to open it up a lot more and actually makes it much more democratic to people who are originally were shy. I mean, the AV industry and an IP network or something remotely network-based, and you can see they're looking for the fire door. They're out the door and off. And getting debates on making it visual is always something of a challenge. And now we have here three very well-respected companies putting it together and come out with this wonderful interface. I mean, who designed this interface, by the way?
Pardon?
Who designed the interface? Who came up with
the
it?
concept, I guess, is from on my side, and there's a really good user interface guy working with me.
Right.
And for those who know some of my early history at Studer,
Right.
there was a console called Vista,
Yes.
and actually the guy who is working on me with this user interface now, that's exactly the same person who was working on the Vista user interface years and years ago.
Okay.
So we are doing it kind of again. We left the console stuff behind us. Now we're taking care of complexity in the IP side.
How are you all going to be using this as a commercial opportunity? I mean, you say, well, everything we do now comes to this lovely interface, this, that, and the other. It's a tremendous sales tool, I have to say, and an effective one. If everything works well, it's intuitive and masks the complexity, which for the technical teams has been wanted, hasn't it, for quite a long time. How are you all going to be? Which part of all this are you think is the most valuable, and what are you going to use?
Well,
We'll start with you, if I may.
What I see typically here at ISC, what is interesting, and merging, we obviously have people, customers in the broadcast market, But we have a lot of people like in concert halls, operas, and this type of infrastructures where they don't have technical, I mean, they do have technical people, but they don't have IP technical specialists or engineers.
Quite.
And if they can, they don't want to hire those people to get to, you know, it's always the same problematics. And talking to these people, typically, just to talk about this field, is exactly the type of solution they're looking for. So there is a great interest. Well, it's very new, so they sniff around it and so on, but it draws a great attention, typically in this type of installation.
Well, usually, Maurice, I mean, it opens up a whole new market for you, doesn't it, essentially? I mean, potentially, you know, and especially with, you know, funding being so difficult. I mean, most of the people in the publicly funded bodies who would look at the Royal Albert Hall at the moment, I mean, having tremendous funding difficulties and doing much more complex productions.
Yeah, exactly.
In lots of old buildings, wanting to use new technology and be able to, the management of all that and actually getting it set up and developed properly once they started their huge builds, it's incredibly challenging. Most of it technical. And that, you know, we have a skill shortage going on at the moment, so anything that can, you know, make someone who's already in there slightly more multifunctional, expands their skill set with a device that makes it the whole concept of management more manageable for them to be able to control. Enormous advantage.
And I should add one thing, is that we coming purely from the, I mean, we did some video tools in the past, but we coming mostly in the majority from the audio side.
Yeah.
But obviously all these concert halls and of course are moving dramatically to the video embedded as well. And so having something that englobes it totally from day one makes total sense.
Well, we just had a session earlier on the Absent Stand talking about virtual production. Now, to most AVers, you think that's a major film, Hollywood and everything else. The moment you start boiling it down into potentially turnkey solutions that can be supplied for much less cost into any kind of experienced area like museums, corporate, and everything else, then you're suddenly thinking about how you're developing your infrastructure and planning for the functionality you're going to plug into it and whether it will be compatible with the already considerable investment you've had before. Then you start to see how this can really make sense. But the questions you then start to ask, is my GUI being developed quickly enough for it to adapt to different challenges it needs to? I can see this thing with putting in there 4 pennyworth, ending up being potentially very complex environments suddenly you have to accommodate, which might look easy to use at the moment, which could infinitely have the job of being much more complex. And can you maintain that user-friendliness or usability when the app starts to grow and becomes potentially unwieldy?
I guess we will see.
That's the challenge for your, that's the challenge for your
I guess we will
guys,
see.
isn't it?
But I guess you know, there's some let's say some rules in user interface design, and I strongly believe that you have to have a use case in mind, and then you follow those rules. It's like in writing good software. Some things you just don't do because you know it's going to cause you problems in the future. And that's probably also true in the user interface. I can just say probably the nicest compliment back in the Vista days in this console was that some years later, or close to 10 years later, the product manager at that time said, you know what, whenever I need to implement a new functionality in this user interface, it looks like you've already thought about it back then.
Yes.
That's probably the greatest compliment you can get for user interface. So I guess it's down to keeping it nice and specific enough, but not too generic, because what we definitely don't want to do is fall apart into a field of buttons and knobs, and the more knobs and buttons you have, the more functionality you get. Because that's actually what a lot of other user interfaces come down to today. They kind of allow you everything, and with that everything, with that generic approach, you end up with rows of buttons and rows of knobs. And that's exactly what I wouldn't call a good user interface. So for me, a user interface is use case specific, and then you might as well open up another page which is use case specific for that. So there's a fine line between keeping it generic and being specific to that.
So between yourselves and StageTec, you're going to be driving the development of this StageNet. Do we call it an initiative, or do we? What's the word we refer to it as?
I guess, I mean, it's a community.
I call it
it's
an
a
environment
community.
or a platform, perhaps. Platform might be, I don't know. There are so many assumptions associated with so many words, aren't there? So at the moment, it seems like an initiative, but there is a tangible product you've developed, of which the interface is a manifestation of that. It's the front end of it.
It's absolutely correct. And actually, the product, the manifestation, is done by StageTec.
Yes.
Right. Basically, my role is kind of I'm bringing some experience to the table. I'm getting, doing the specifications and stuff like that, but it's completely done by StageTec.
And the interest of StageTec, by the way, was also to open new markets for StageTec, because for StageTec in the past was known for high-end installations in theaters, in the broadcast field. But now with StageNet, there are completely new markets available. We can open for StageTec the Pro AV market.
I think that's, you touched on it earlier, that's the ARISTA Networks interest as well, really. The 2110 world, AES67, high-end audio over IP, it's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And if you look at the stats on what is the content or what data flows across the internet, there's some ridiculous number, like it'll be way over 90% in not very long of that content, or the data across the internet is media. And so all we're seeing really is more and more and more media. And I think this particular initiative, this community, is about trying to leverage the lessons and the technologies that have been built for 2110 for high value live production, and to bring those down into the kind of the top ends of the Pro AV space, where there's 2110 turns into IPMX. That brings a lot of simplifications, the ability to build networks that are a little bit simpler, have lower expectations, cheaper. Don't want to throw the money words in there, but certainly I kind of think of the Pro AV market is way, way, way bigger than the 2110 market. The 2110 market is very prestigious, very interesting, but the Pro AV market is absolutely everywhere. And so that's what ARISTA Networks is interested in, is getting a bit of that market, because even if you think about an enterprise network these days, a decent sized enterprise network, there's a ton of media across that indeed. Like a really big business, they'll have their own internal studios, creating their own content, doing their own advertising, doing their own internal comms. That is still a complicated thing to do. But actually, if you can make it simple and make that available to people, democratize the capabilities, then I think we're heading in the right direction.
It's interesting to say the Pro AV market. That's been the thing, hasn't it? What will our market? Will it be consumed by other things? Because we do require proprietary needs for various things, and people always think about AV last in their accommodation on an infrastructure. It's always seemed to be quite separate. But now the whole thing, maybe COVID, rushed this up, and it certainly speeded up the digital infrastructure programs that people are going to, which made them rethink how they're operating, how much flexibility was in their technology planning, if you want to call it that, and where we're going to. So workplace becomes more collaboration as a service. More service providers like, say, AV-ISPL are now experienced providers. They're not just putting together a few bells and whistles, and Symphony now is a much more IT and AV management tool than we ever thought was going to be developed. So there's so much change going on. It depends how the networking infrastructures are going to change, and how much of that will go in your favour, and how much is developed, because I can see immense amounts of complexity coming our way to be able to accommodate so many different demands that people are now loading into their environments, which raises the question, with complexity and scale and volume, how much is, what price is going to be available for? How are you going to price an environment that's supposed to be democratized? Is this going to disappear into the general functionality of your boxes, or is this going to require, why should people pay a license premium for what should be part of the basic product kit, if one had to be brutal?
Well, the complexity is going to come anyway. You know, there's no way around that as it stands today, because the high end of the AV world is going to merge with the low to medium end of the broadcast world, and even today there's a lot of commonality in those two markets. Yeah, technology-wise it's very, very similar, and there's also the potential for a lot of reuse of things that are already there. The problem with the likes of, you know, the more proprietary standards that exist today is there's hurdles to overcome to use those. Number one, there's cost. Sometimes there's strategic discussions and considerations as well. The nice thing about what's being done here is it's all done on an open platform, an open standard. So there's no access cost. It's just a decision as to whether or not that's something you want to go into. There's a large number of components already available out there that support certainly the ST2110 standard, and the IPMX standard should make that easier to get a larger number of other components coming there. So the complexity will come just because there'll be a lot of components that will move in this direction, because the advantages are significant. To reconfigure what you have in an IP world is so much easier than it is in an SDI or any other world, because you don't have to really plug any cables together. You just reconfigure your network, and that makes life much easier. But with that comes complexity, because you no longer have the cable guy who knows where that cable goes to and where it should go to now. You have to do this via an interface, exactly the sort of interface that Stefan's doing, so you don't have to find the cables anymore, you just have to see where it is. And the nice thing about doing it in software is you don't plug the wrong thing into the wrong place.
Yes.
Because you can see where it's going.
But it's going to happen at some point, isn't it? Once you imagine the whole environment becoming much more intelligent, and that's, you know, whether it's AI, whether it's machine learning, whatever it may be, there's going to have to be some intelligence within the framework that automatically configures itself for whatever functionality and technology you're plugging into your network, and either lets you know or doesn't, whatever it is. So everybody's going to have to start coming up with a way of making sure their products are thinking outside their own small ecosystem.
Well,
wonderful though that may be, I have to say, I'm always in favour of small ecosystems because you know they work.
That's one of the beauties of NMOS. NMOS tells you what you are. You know, so you have a device that it registers itself and it says, this is what I am. So you don't have to work out what it is, because NMOS comes and tells you. So that takes one level of complexity away from it, that the device is sitting there and saying, this is what I can do for you. So that reduces a whole level of complexity you would otherwise have to deal with.
Yes, it's automatic, these intelligent management environments. Yeah. Are we going to see lots of them appear, or, I mean, you're in there quite early on, but I can see a big potential market for these sort of things appearing. Now we have complexity in the management devices themselves, and everybody with conflicting GUIs everywhere saying, well, I have an app for that, you know, and then, well, it's easy to use, why don't we use it? They will have relative compatibility between the management environments. So, you know, you can see where it's potentially going. It's a question of sitting on top of complexity and keeping it simple.
And I mean, I always say being easy is not easy. It's actually really complicated.
Tombstone, that
so, obviously, mobile phones or whatever, these guys have a huge amount of resources behind it to work on that and to work on the details and strive for the details. And for us, even the whole Pro AV industry together with broadcast, we're still very, very small compared to these guys, very small. So sitting in front of this elephant, which, oh yes, everything needs to be automatic, then what if that, you're lost instantly. So the only approach, in my view, to this elephant is to cut it into pieces and say, okay, let's start with exactly that category of problems and how can we solve it. That's exactly those 5 people here in this room. Let's start with these 5 people, and let's start with the aim of this plug and play and ease of use of these products, and let's solve it, and then we take it from there.
We're also a group of organisations that believe in best of breed, in quality, in customer service, in customer focus. And coming from a networking company, we are standards based. We don't invent stuff. We invent lots of clever things, but one of our key attributes is we want to be standards based, because that allows interoperability. It allows us to sell to customers where they see the value of our products and of the way we behave, not because we've locked them into an ecosystem. And I personally think the same is true here, right? We will succeed because what we do, what we deliver, adds value, makes things simpler, people like it. Now, if somebody comes along and does something similar, and they do it better, well then we failed to be innovative and move forward. And the thing that will keep us on our toes is that other people may well come along and try and do something similar. But do you know what? We've already made steps forwards, and as long as we listen to our customers and deliver what they want, then we will continue to be successful in selling to those guys. So I welcome other people either at some point joining or trying to do something different, but we have to stand by our values, and we have to stand by delivering good products.
Quite right, well said too. What more can we do to encourage people to? You're going to Infocom, I'm assuming, are you? You'll all be there. That'd be a great launch pad. I mean, it'd be interesting to see people who haven't been to Infocom. It's going to be a big turnout, I suspect, and it'll be interesting to see what people do. How are you trying to generate more interest? Is there anything we can do to talk about? We will do anyway, I'm sure, but to drum up more interest and everything else by saying we're bringing much more attention to this and making people that, you need to look at this and look at it now. Is it going to be a trade show, or is it going to be other means of doing it? And you're going to build up a list of resources on the internet and then pot them off, and you could create a whole new education program based on this, couldn't you? That could be really developed and explained clearly through all the phases, which would be, very, very supportive and convincing, and they will respect your name and automatically assume you're coming up with something of quality and it's being done for the right reasons.
Well, there's the StageNet community is there already.
Right.
If people want to know more, then we encourage them to visit stagenet.com and sign up, register, find out what's going to happen next. And
But
there'll be stuff.
outside the community, where you're obviously trying to break into new markets, which is the point here as well.
Well, there's also AIMS, where you'll be showing an interoperability capability, and AIMS is the overarching body developing it. So, once it's showcased within other devices and other environments, you get the idea of how powerful this approach can be, because they are open.
And we're gonna also do some repeating webcasts and stuff like that, where we want to keep kind of also answering feedback and topics people bring up. It's really not just a community of manufacturers; it's a community of end users as well. This is really what we believe in, and as you say, best of breed, and that's cool. Healthy competition, cool. So there should not be a kind of a artificial protection here of what we do. We really just, if you say what you guys have in common, then it's first of all the belief that this ease of use has to become real, and not in 10 years now. And it's possible, we prove it now.